Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Comic Source Comic Boom collaboration. Merry Christmas Eve, Merry Spawnmas Eve. It's day 11, 11th issue of Spawn. We'll talk about the final issue, issue 12, tomorrow on Christmas Day. Now, we are recording these back to back, but I should have a lot better sound. I was on my iPad yesterday at my remote location here. Went out and bought a webcam today, so should be a lot better on this borrowed computer that did not have a webcam. So yeah, we'll talk about issue 11, we'll talk about issue 12. We'll have a little bit of a break, and then come the new year, we'll be back with Spawn every day. At least we hope. As Rocky said, it's a very ambitious project. I'm sure we'll miss a day here or there, but you guys seem to be really enjoying this trip down memory lane, and it's going to be interesting because when you think about it, it's been almost 30 years that it's taken to get to this point with Spawn, 320 some issues. We're going to be covering it in a year, so we're going to be traveling through that aesthetic and how society has changed, culture has changed, how has Spawn changed with it, but it's going to be, to us, a rapidly accelerated timeline covering them so quickly. All that being said, we're going to talk about issue 11 today. I can say, and it's not really that close, this was my least favorite issue of the series so far. Really didn't like it. What do you think, Rocky?
Yeah, I didn't. I thought it was kind of it was a little disappointing. It was just it, it was sort of retreading on old territory. We already know that Al Simmons is Spawn and that he's living with the sort of street people, and this issue is just like a gang war. It's just like a sort of like a cheap turf war between nerds and creeps, and it was just more an exposition dump, rehashing the same old things we knew before. This was the first issue where McFarlane's habit of repeating everything, repeating the same plot points, has kind of become annoying. There's a difference between a narrative and a plot point, and he keeps sort of repeating the same, restating the same plot points that we already know. And this is the first issue that I actually found it a little bit more annoying than in past issues. I found it strangely kind of interesting and even kind of funny and enjoyable and at times, satirical. But now it's getting a little bit annoying in this issue. But we'll get into it.
Well, keep in mind this issue 11 is actually written by Frank Miller. It's not even McFarlane, so that's what makes it even worse. Um,
Fair
and
enough.
I'm not to badmouth Frank Miller. I'm not a big Frank Miller fan, honestly. I mean, I know some people just bow down in reverence. I'm not that guy. Did he do some good things in the past? Yes. Has it been a while since he's produced anything I've enjoyed? Yes. To be honest, but it's I don't know. I really don't know why this is the way that it is. I mean, we talked about the Dave Sim issue, which a little bit of a different tone with issue 10, and he definitely was making a statement about creator rights and this and that, and it was its own thing, and it was fine. The issues previous to that, the Gaiman issue, the Alan Moore issue, I thought were great in terms of a couple of the best issues scripting wise. But this one, for being a comic book legend, I mean, it's kind of very illustrative. I think that you didn't even realize it was Frank Miller and not Todd McFarlane, because yeah, Frank Miller puts a lot of goddamn words in here, more than are necessary. It's like you can forgive McFarlane for doing it because he's not a writer, regardless. I mean, I guess if you write comics, technically you're a comic book writer, but it's not his forte. As opposed to Frank Miller, who made his name as a comic book writer, and still the exposition is super heavy. And even the parts that are new, like you alluded to, this gang war between the nerds and the creeps, it's just not interesting. The characters are super tropey, super two dimensional. Yeah, it doesn't really move the narrative forward. I don't know. It was kind of rough.
Yeah, I
Maybe
will. I will add though that the violence, the level of violence, when you say Frank Miller, yeah, there's definitely some Miller-esque type of violence, but McFarlane did a pretty good job himself adding in the violence early on. So yeah, if I never paid attention to, I just assumed it was McFarlane that wrote it. So yeah, I would have been fooled. Miller very much, Frank Miller channeled his inner Todd McFarlane when he wrote this one.
Yeah, it's again very strange. Now McFarlane does return with issue 12, and I have my own problems with that issue as well, and we'll get to those when we talk about that issue. But let's dig into this one, into the meat of it. And again, maybe part of it is the fact that Miller, this is the first issue he's writing. So in a way, he is sort of putting in that recap. It's also a comic in the 90s where that's what they did back then was recap a lot. But there's a difference between recapping and retelling the entire story. Also, we did see at the end of issue 9 that Spawn had pushed that button on Angela's spear and sort of disappeared and went into that purgatory place where Cerebus eventually rescued him and then took him actually to not Spawn to McFarlane's house. Apparently at that point, Spawn goes back to New York, to the alleys where he's made himself a home. I guess it's not the smoothest transition, going from 9 to 11. And we talked about the fact you could technically skip over 10. Maybe it's not available digitally right now, but that's got to be kind of jarring because again, he pushes the button on the staff in issue 9 and disappears in a poof of energy. Then you open up 11 and he's just back, with kind of no explanation. And we're not even really given a good explanation other than, well, let's get back to reality.
Yeah, he makes a reference to a dream about an aardvark, and that's sort of an inside joke throughout the issue about Cerebus the aardvark, and him just, it's just, his street people just pass it off as L, just Spawn's hallucinating again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not only a talking aardvark, but one that smokes. So,
yeah.
I mean, I guess it's just enough to put in the first dialogue box here, or the first exposition box. Now let's get back to reality, as in issue 10 wasn't reality. So, okay. So Spawn's back and he's having somewhat of a nightmare, and one of his street buddies is saying, snap out of it. You're going to attract the attention of the cops. He ends up slapping Spawn, like, apologies for this, Al. He smacks him. And that does work. It kind of wakes Spawn up and he's like, oh, Bobby Boots. I was having this dream, like, Rocky was just alluding to. This really mean angel and a talking aardvark. And he smoked too. And they're like, man, it must be the wine talking. And Spawn's like, I don't drink, damn it. And they're like, okay, calm down. We've been hanging out for a while. And we don't really know your story. So, don't get me wrong, but, who are you? And he kind of apologizes and says, it's a long story. I guess I just need to open up to you guys. We call Boots because he loves boots. And the fact is that this alley and you guys are my home. And before he can actually tell the story, there's a big explosion. He goes running off. He finds this girl who's been shot by some sort of giant cannon. And Spawn himself gets shot by the same weapon and literally has a hole in his chest. And we see this giant cyborg. I guess 90s cyborgs were the in thing. And also drawing gigantic, because look, we saw Overt and now we see Boomer. In this one, we have a guy named Byron. They're all just giant hulking comic book characters. And I don't know, maybe that's a little too 90s for me, too tropey. Doesn't work. Every 90s cliche. Look at all the pouches and the guns and the grenades. It's like, oh my god, that's one trend from the 90s that I'm glad went away. No subtlety at all. But anyway, Spawn's friends are like, oh no, you hurt Spawn, and he's like, you killed my pal. And the guy, and again, great, just Frank Miller at the height of his power, scripting this. Maybe I'll kill you too, you drunk old turd. Wow, that is some great comic book writing right there.
Of course.
I mean, just so bad. Spawn chooses at that moment to get up with the gaping hole in his chest and grabs the gun, and the guy's like, this can't be happening. And he goes running off, and Spawn's buddies are kind of surprised. Like, why are you letting him get away? And how are you not dead with a hole in your chest bigger than my fist? I'm confused. And then expositionally, we're told Spawn's letting this guy go because he wanted to save the girl. He wasn't able to. So who is this guy? Where did he get the cannon? Spawn wants to stop him, but it's not enough to just stop him. He wants to find out more information. So he lets him go so he can follow him. But first he has to use up a little bit of his precious energy to heal himself, which he does. And to Rocky's point, in a few episodes ago, talking about using his powers, we should have a counter right here, right? Because the last time we saw the counter was when Spawn pushed the button on the staff and it went all the way down, not even to zeros, but just to dashes. Now he's back. Is there still a count? Does he still have limited power? We saw last issue when it was the not Spawn, the McFarlane Spawn, he had unlimited power. Does this Spawn have unlimited power? Like, this is a great chance to let us know, hey, and McFarlane's drawing it, so even though maybe Frank Miller doesn't know to put that in, McFarlane's drawing it. He could have been like, hey, Frank, I'm going to put this in here so people know. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems a little inconsistent in that respect, and it's going to be curious to see if he continues with that clock moving forward into future issues, because it seems like something that would have, I mean, at some point it might run down pretty quick if you're going to have, depending on which writers you have guest writing. I mean, that they might put Spawn in situations where he might be using up his power pretty quick. Especially if it's Frank Miller, because Frank Miller tends to put his characters through the ringer.
Yeah, and we saw in issue 8 where he went and gathered all those weapons, and he talked about how it was more familiar to him to use conventional weaponry, even though these are futuristic laser guns or whatever, supposedly cutting edge military technology, but more familiar, more what he was used to using when he was alive, and it doesn't drain his powers. And in fact, he keeps that sort of hand cannon that blew the hole in him that he took from Boomer. And then we get a very McFarlane-esque full-page splash there, and you can see he's bringing the gun with him. He follows Boomer. He overhears these guys talking. So there's creeps and there's nerds. Not exactly the Crips and Bloods, but I guess the 90s version. And these nerds they're like a technological street gang, I guess. Sort of. Kind of weird.
Yes, they stay clean. They don't swear. They don't do drugs. They only steal electronics and kill creeps.
Yeah, creeps being the other rival gang.
That's right.
And so they don't believe Boomer when he talks about the fact that he blew a hole in this guy and the guy got back up, and they're saying, you must have put something in your arm or up your nose or down your throat, and that makes you stupid, and that's bad. We don't allow stupid people to be a member of the nerds. And so then they call in Byron, who is again another giant hulking, even bigger than Boomer, giant hulking character with a big mustache and a mohawk. And not only does he have pouches and belts and giant shoulder pads and a whole armband of grenades, he's got a mohawk as well. Doesn't get more 90s than that. And those boots, man, Jesus. Wow, they look like trash cans.
Yeah, no, it's very cliche here, but you know what? It is. I guess it is a lot of fun, but it is cliche. I don't know if it's just I feel like laughing at this picture because I'm drawn to his crotch. He's got this big gaping like leather crotch thing. This Byron character.
It looks like a shoehorn. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, it looks like one of those bull balls that truckers from Montana put on the back of their truck when they're to brag about their. I don't know. It's sorry, just the way it's hanging. It's funny. It's 90s excess on crazy characters, man, and right down to the Liefeld. It's not Liefeld, but he's competing with Liefeld for the shoulder pads. That's for sure.
Yeah, and so we also learned that the leader of the nerds is named Norton because Boomer says, "I'm clean, Norton, I swear." And based on kind of the size of him, his body shape, which he's very skinny, but yet has a giant belt. Like his belt is like 25% of his body. Yeah. It's insane. His belt is taller than his head. So maybe Edward Norton from the Honeymooners is what I'm thinking where he got the name. But anybody who's used a computer in the last 20 years may know Norton Antivirus, which is one of the most popular antivirus programs. So
that's what I thought. I thought of Norton Antivirus myself.
Yeah, exactly. But remember, this was before the advent of widespread use of computers and the internet. It's kind of in the early days of it. So Norton Antivirus wasn't a thing, but it's kind of ironic that it works on that level too. So anyway, Spawn's heard enough. He knows, what threat he's up against, and he thinks, well, at least it's not a talking aardvark. So as he leaves, Byron accidentally kills Boomer. And they're not too worried about it. So they're like, ah, nuts, he's dead. So Spawn's thinking, well, this is not good. Last thing he needs is a turf war on those alleys that his friends inhabit, because apparently they run right through a place that'll be a good pipeline for whatever. I mean, they don't do drugs, so maybe it's stolen goods or whatever. Whatever these nerds are into, the alley is right in the way of what would be a pipeline for these nerds through creep territory. And Spawn's thinking that his power is depleted. So again, is it still on the dashes? Is he at 0? He had enough to heal his chest. Can he only use a limited amount, in a certain time? Like, what's going on? And he's like, there's too many guns to actually go down there and fight. He's got to think like a soldier, use his training that he had pre-spawn, and figure out when the best time to attack is. Meanwhile, back in the alley, his friends Bobby and Boots are wondering, what the hell are we going to do with this dead body? We can't leave it here. It'll attract cops. Maybe we can take it down to the mission. And while he's trying to figure that out, there's more clank, clank, clank. We got another giant bowling ball sized character here. Really tired of seeing this type of character, to be honest with you. This time his name is James. He's a cyborg enforcer for the Creep Gang. He's big and mean and rather emotional, and he starts bawling that this girl's dead. And again, so it's not, the reason I dislike this issue is not just the exposition, but these characters are just so tropey from Miller. It's not, I don't know, I don't really enjoy it, and the violence is so cartoonish. But anyway, this guy James decides that he's going to mark the alley with blood as a warning to the nerds to let them know it belongs to the creeps. So he reaches out and he's going to basically pop Bobby's head like a zit when he gets shot from behind. And it's Spawn who has blown a hole in him with the gun that he took off of Boomer earlier. And he says, sure, that's a smelly, filthy rat hole, but it's our smelly, filthy rat hole. Get lost. And there's a little bit of a pitched battle. And ultimately he says, well, this is my chance. And what he does is he goes to the creeps and he uses a little bit of his power to put on somewhat of a fireworks show and says that all the creeps are going to die. Meet us in the alley at such and such a day. Then he goes back to the nerds and he says this war will end. The alley is going to be ours. All nerds die tonight. We're going to hunt you down. So he basically sets it up where both forces show up in the alley that night to fight each other. And once they've pretty much killed everybody, the only one left alive, they've all killed each other, is Byron. Then Spawn takes out Byron. And the way he does that is kind of interesting, because Byron would be a really tough person for Spawn to defeat on his own. Use up a lot of that power. And again, he's talking about his power being depleted. He has armor that, apparently can deflect the weaponry, that gun that Spawn has. So Spawn says, let's play alien. And when he first said that, I didn't get the meaning. I'm like, what does he mean? Like, because Spawn looks not human? Is that what he means? But he does use enough of his power, apparently, even though it's depleted. He does have enough left to teleport, but he teleports and you're like, okay, well, where did he go? Did he just run away and abandon Bobby to Byron? And then all of a sudden, Byron says, her? What? Ugh. And we get some exposition talking about how tough the armor is. But like the escape artist Houdini said about being trapped in a bank vault, they're made to keep people out. They're not made to keep people in. And so what we learn is where Spawn teleported was actually inside Byron, where I guess he doesn't really need to use much of his power to bust out, just his usual strength and claws, and he busts out of Byron. And this is what Rocky's saying about the level of violence in this issue, very Frank Miller-esque. And Bobby's like, well, geez, Al, I'm not going to ask you a bunch of questions. Clearly, you're beyond my understanding. You just popped out of this guy's chest. But what I want to know is, how does this help us get the alley back? And Spawn says, the cops will come and clean everything up and we'll just move back in, as he casually tosses Byron's head aside and says, life goes on. So, uh, yeah, just super, like I said, super tropey. Really tired of the character. And again, I'm not necessarily pointing the finger at Frank Miller. Maybe it was McFarlane who chose the designs for these characters. But does every character have to be just this big giant meathead character? I mean, we already had Overkill as that. Give me something different. Give me something interesting.
Yeah. I
So
think
yeah,
from the story, it definitely, knowing Frank Miller wrote it, it is absolutely right up there with classic tropey Frank Miller in terms of the very simplistic violent stories. The whole thing is a gang war. It's violent. It starts with violence. It ends with violence. That's not surprising. Now, trying to read a little bit more into it, though, I did actually like what Spawn did. I liked the way that he sort of played both gangs against each other. It sort of reminds me of the god that wears a red hat and a black hat and a white hat, and there's the two warring tribes on both sides of the road. One tribe worships the black god, one side worships the white god, but yet there's only one God, and every day God walks down the middle of the road, and he's wearing a hat on, and one side of his hat is black, the other side of his hat is white, and then he walks down the road, and then the people on the one side worship the God with the white hat because they think God wears a white hat, and the other tribe think God wears a black hat. And then when God gets to the end of the road, he turns around and walks back again, and he flips his hat around, and both warring tribes, they don't realize they're both praying to the same God. So it reminds me here of Spawn, playing these two gangs like a violin, and they thinking that he's not a god, but he's the enemy, and he's the enemy of both of them. I kind of like that. It was for a short story, a done in one. I thought it was very well. I thought it was done. So even though it was tropey, it was done in a fun way. They wiped each other out. The letterer was certainly tested. A lot of booms, a lot of destruction, and um, yeah. The name of the girl that was killed at the beginning, who was a member of the nerd gang member, a boomer killed the girl who was asking for Spawn's help to save her, and her name was Buffy. So even the name Buffy, I thought, was that from Buffy the Vampire Slayer? Because this was in the early '90s. I think that's when Buffy the but even the girl's name I thought was a little tropey there. But it was a fun issue. But like you said, it was definitely something where nerds versus creeps. It was definitely something where it kind of felt maybe like a filler issue, but because it had just exorbitant violence, it probably put a shit-eating grin on people's faces. When you consider that we got Cerebus in the previous issue, this one was they probably we needed to be reminded that this was maybe more of a violent character, because coming off of issue 10, which was more of a sort of a dream sequence with Al finding his happiness on this seventh level of hell, or whatever the hell it is. This was definitely a decided shift in tone.
yeah, and I mean to McFarlane's credit, I mean these were the biggest names in comics at the time, right? Getting Alan Moore on consecutive issues. You got Alan Moore, you got Neil Gaiman, you got Dave Sim, you got Frank Miller.
Yeah,
I mean, you're
that's pretty good.
yeah, you're pulling in just the top line creators, and I imagine part of the reason that McFarlane did it was because he's like, hey, these are creators that people know. People may not, the more discerning comic fan, they may not be picking up Spawn. Maybe they read my Spider-Man run and didn't like it. Maybe they're not willing to give my writing a try, but maybe I can get them to pick up an issue that's written by Neil Gaiman, and get them interested enough in the character of Spawn that even when I come back to the writing duties, maybe they'll hang on. Maybe they'll stick with the series. So I'm sure it worked because these were some pretty high selling issues. Again, we know how many issues the first issue sold, 1.7 million, but and I'm sure there's historical data somewhere about second, third, fourth, all the way up through the 12th, but I don't know how to find it. I did some internet searches and couldn't find it. But once we get a little further along, we can use the Comic-Con resource, the Comic-Con website, and we will, as we go through, once they're available, we'll be giving you circulation numbers because it'll be interesting to talk about because there are issues of Spawn that are pretty expensive. Like some later issues of Spawn are probably worth more than issue one because the print runs were so small because the readership just fell off. So anyway, that's going to do it for this episode. I don't think there's anything else to add. We'll be back tomorrow with Spawn Miss Day 12. We hope you all join us. We also hope you're all having a joyous holiday season and spending time with family and being safe and all that kind of stuff. So we appreciate the support as always. And anything else to add, Rocky?
Just Merry Spawn, Miss.
Merry Spawn, Miss everybody. We will talk to you next time.
Yeah.